Que vamos a analizar en los próximos minutos de la mano de Temo de Fiore cómo está el entorno macroeconómico en Estados Unidos y sobre todo vamos a aprovechar, dada su posición como jefe del ISM, para analizar más en detalle el último dato que tuvimos relativo al PMI manufacturero que plantea todos los meses la firma. Timothy, thank you so much for having us a few minutes.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Timothy, since you're the chair of the ISM, I'd like to take a closer look at the April data to understand it better. Economic activity in the manufacturing sector grew in April, but the ESM index registered 53.5. It's a decrease compared to the level reported in March. What did it tell us?
So we had a complicated report this month for sure. A lot of dynamics going on. I mean, first there's a worldwide economic concern, primarily around Russia and Ukraine. We're also sitting here with seasonal adjustment factors that we apply every month that generally follow the seasons. You know, March and April and May are big manufacturing periods. June, July, you have vacations. But we really haven't had a season since COVID hit, since we shut down for the pandemic, because we've been trying to catch up ever since. So we do apply seasonal adjustment factors. The production and the new order number were reduced by 4 points because of that. And you know, we're sitting here with the highest prices pretty much in 40 years and the longest lead times for capital equipment and manufacturing on record. And we have buyers who have placed orders well beyond what they normally would do. And I think we're sitting with a pause because they really don't want to place additional orders at very high prices that may or may not be the right price a year or so from now. So the order books for 2022 are pretty much filled up. And I think we really just had an adjustment here, people stopping and saying, look, I'm well positioned here for the rest of 2022. I'm faced with higher prices. I'm not going to proceed. So we had a really good month. I think you saw the new order number come down from March, no doubt about that. But I do want to say that I put all of the 10 sub-indexes into three groups: demand, consumption, and inputs. And you know, if you have demand, then everything else is pretty much just a challenge. And we absolutely have demand. I go through thousands of comments every month, and at a strong ratio of 3 to 1, we have more people optimistic about the future than not so optimistic. So demand is still there, not an issue. We're still supply constrained. And the real story for the month of April was the fact that employment couldn't get to the level that it needed to get to so that the production number could go up. That's the real story.
Mm-hmm. And Timothy, in terms of GDP, what do you expect from U.S. economic growth?
That's a big question. I'm not sure I can answer that. I could just talk to the manufacturing economy. So, the reason that the PMI, manufacturing PMI, is so closely watched is that we're really an early indicator of U.S. economic growth. So, the transportation sector is an early indicator of the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector is an early indicator of the service sector, and the two of them combined equal U.S. GDP. We're showing no easing at all for 2022, none. And generally we've had 6 manufacturing economic cycles in the last 20 years. The typical average is a 34-month cycle, and right now we're sitting, I think, at 23 months in this one. And we think this cycle is going to be extend out longer, simply because the supply constraints have acted as a governor and a constraint on us being able to peak, getting to the highest potential level, which really says it's going to stretch out longer than the typical 34, 35 months. So I'm still optimistic that we're sitting here 23 months into a 42 to 44 month manufacturing expansion.
As you say, it's an early indicator of U.S. economic growth, so it's really important to look at the improvement or decreasing signals. And about the central banks, the Federal Reserve is tasked with slowing the U.S. economy enough to control inflation, but not so much that it tips into recession. That's the key point now. Do you think Jerome Powell will manage to avoid a recession? Because because this week Powell said he can't warranty a soft landing as the Fed looks to control disinflation.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's a massive challenge, and the likelihood of the Federal Reserve being able to land the plane softly is pretty low. I think if you look back at back to the 30s and 1930s and things, the chances of us being able to get this inflation tamed without going into a technical recession is probably somewhere at best 20%. So, a technical recession is 2 quarters of declining economic growth. So, we've already had one. The first quarter of 2022 has been determined to be a negative growth profile, primarily because our imports were high and our exports were low, as well as the fact that we reduced inventory. So it's almost like a technical thing. I don't know that I definitely would not call the first quarter a recessionary, but technically if we have another quarter, this quarter, that looks like the last quarter, we'll essentially be in a technical recession. But, be it as it may, I think the interest rates have to go up a lot higher than where they are to get the inflation rate down. So let me explain a little bit. We've had high prices at all levels of our supply chain for quite a period of time. And the belief is that it's transitory, that it's really driven because of the lack of supply, which means that when you don't have enough goods, then the prices go up. Yeah, no doubt about that. So we've also and we had easing occurring before the Russia-Ukraine issue. That drove the energy markets worldwide kind of crazy. And as a result, we've seen everybody's prices go back up because transportation, energy, anything that goes into steel, cement, chemicals, plastics, it all has its roots in petrochemicals. So, we're faced with that, but the real sign of inflation is ever increasing labor wages, because the only way you can take those down, labor wages, is to see a recession. And a recession means that you lay people off and you replace them at lower wages. So that's the big challenge that Chairman Powell has. A lot of people believe that in order to get there, you've got to raise interest rates up above the CPI level, which would be really high, 8 or 9%. I have a lot of confidence in them that they'll do their best. Right now, we're sitting here with very low interest rates still. I think 2% is very low. And they're starting now to not replace the bonds that are maturing. So you'll see the balance sheet go down, which means that the Fed is taking money out of the economy. So I think on top of that, we're sitting here in an election year, which it's not popular to have inflation and it's not popular to have a recession. So there's a lot of timing going on, and we'll see where it eventually lands. In the meantime, I think outside of any extraordinary events, like a massive problem with fuel across the world, or the Fed, doing a 2-point increase in the interest rates in the next 6 months, we're in for another long run here that should probably, from a manufacturing standpoint, take us all the way through 2023.
And as always, Powell's speeches are always tactical, as it is from Lagarde leading the ECB. As you said, he's decided to do his best. It's a big challenge that he has now. But do you think the Fed will be more hawkish on next monetary policy meetings? To the point that it is possible to have a 75 basic points rate hike on next monetary policy meeting in June?
Yeah, I think, what I can share with your listeners and your watchers is, as I mentioned, the true sign of inflation is ever increasing wage growth. And the Fed has 2 goals. The first is to achieve essentially zero unemployment, and they've gotten there. I mean, 3.5% unemployment is very low. It used to be 5% was the number, less than 5%, and you had full employment. So we're pretty much there now on full unemployment. Unfortunately, the other chart that they have is to manage inflation, and as the chair and the committee have determined, is the goal is to be 2% over time. So we spend a lot of time under 2%, and now we're spending a decent amount of time over 2%. So the goal is really to somehow keep the wage inflation down. Well, what's happening with as I mentioned at the beginning here, the biggest disappointment in the month of April was the employment number. We almost went into contraction. So if I dig into the detail, and I have a lot of comments that can support this, and I do dig into detail, the degree of quits and causing backfilling of employees is increasing. The root cause of that is that people are leaving their employer for a higher wage or a better working condition job somewhere else. And when that happens, if you need to hire 2 people and you've hired 2 at the end of the week, but 2 left on you, you still have to hire 2 more people. And that leads to an ever increasing wage increase cycle. That it's kind of an indication that we're almost there right now. So I'm hoping that can kind of slow a little bit. I also measure comments in the employment section about are things getting easier to hire people or not. So, in the month of January, 11% of my comments said that things were getting easier compared to December. In the month of February, only 4%, and that was primarily around the Omicron wave that came through in January and early February. We got better in March at 12%, so it was getting easier to hire, and now we're back at 1%. So this labor force issue just isn't getting resolved, and it's the core of everything, whether it be the panelist companies responding to our survey, or their sub-suppliers, the transporters that have to move goods around the country, around the world. It's a labor shortage issue. Now, I'm hoping, with the stock market coming down a little bit, maybe the people who early retired will come back to take advantage of that higher wage job. Maybe they'll be bored sitting at home. That should help. We have the high schools graduating in the June timeframe. That means more people will enter the workforce. And we have the colleges graduating in May, which should help too. But somehow we have to solve this labor issue because the demand is there. Production consumption is constrained because we don't have enough labor. Labor at the panelist companies as well as labor at the supply base.
Also, we will monitor carefully the evolution of labor wages. Timothy Fiore, chair of the ISM, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.